Hello. First, could we give a round of applause for our technicians, the translators, and the food preparation people? I think it's just been a wonderful thing, and they worked very, very hard on this. So thank you. Is everyone familiar with what the Tower of Babel is? Tower of Babel, ring a bell? How would you describe that? How about typical, multi-family, compact, residential? The Tower of Babel. We don't normally think of it as a favorable idea, this Tower of Babel thing. But the problem with the Tower of Babel wasn't that it was vertical. It wasn't that it was multi-family dwelling. It wasn't that it was dense. The problem was they didn't communicate well. They couldn't talk to each other. They didn't have relationships. So that brings us to a point that several have made today. Right from the very beginning, our very first speaker this morning said we need to stand shoulder to shoulder. Look at the Infonavit logo. Hand to hand, shoulder to shoulder. And what I'd like to talk about a little bit for a few minutes is basically two brief presentations that you'll see how they fit together. One is the telescope view. Let's look out and see what's out there. And then we'll take the microscope view and see what's there. And we're going to look at how people have to do with everything we've talked about today and anything we'll ever talk about. Whether it's negotiations, whether it's raising your teenage children. Anybody have teenage children? Nobody. Wow, amazing. Okay, go. All right. You probably already have them and, wiping your brow, right? So every relationship, everything we'll ever do in life has to do with people, doesn't it? I mean, we talk about buildings, we talk about architecture, we talk about 1,000 different topics, but if you boil it all down, if people don't cooperate, you have nothing. There's nothing left, right? So when we're talking about housing for the poor, or we're talking about food programs, or we're talking about any particular kind of way to create jobs or to create a structure, you have to try to understand that if we build an orphanage, we're not going to end up with the results that we want. Wait, they have food, they have rules and regulations, they have bedtimes and curfews, they have clothing, they have all that a person could possibly need in an orphanage, right? No. What they don't have is family. And that's where we've got to go with all of these things. So we're talking about the details, the laws, we're talking about the architecture, the systems, the plan, and all those things have to be there. But at the end of the day, if we don't have relationships, if we haven't built in a way where we connect with one another, then we probably aren't going to get too much done. If you look around the world right now, I've been in 40 countries, there's not a lot getting done right now. There's 10 billion good ideas and 7 billion people having them, and yet there's not a lot getting done. The income disparity is getting greater, not less. The crime is getting greater, in general, not less. There are little pockets here and there where some good ideas win temporarily, but by and large, I live in Washington, D.C. I live in a neighborhood with some very, very expensive homes, and last night I got a text message saying that there were 5 thugs walking by with silver pistols, and there was a fight in the street right in front. There is no protection against crime and poverty and issues unless we're solving the relationship problems. If we're not at that level solving the problems, then everything else we're going to do will be diminished over time. The law of entropy, the second law of thermodynamics, all the best ideas decay, and they disappear, they're passing away. This is a telescope view, and we're going to look at relationships and what we can do at the grassroots level to change the lives that will live in these homes, right? At some point in time, we run out of other people's money, as I think it was, who was it? The British Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher, I think she said. At some point, we run out of other people's money. We've got to generate jobs. We have 1.7 billion jobs on this planet for 7 billion people. We're going to have 10 billion people here before long. Are we really going to have proportionally more jobs by then? Unless we make some fundamental changes at the very grassroots level of how we do business and how we relate to each other. So first, the telescope. I've entitled this the free gigabit Wi-Fi, but there's really, you'll see, there it is. Okay. I went to junior high and high school in this house. It's 90 square meters. There were 7 of us living in this house. One bathroom that was about, I don't know, 4 square meters for 7 of us. 5 of us in high school and junior high all at the same time. We had some issues of space, right? Well, this is a castle compared to how a lot of people live. But you know, I had my pants. I had clothespins holding up my pants because I never had a pair of pants that fit me until I was probably out of college. I didn't care in college. Nobody cares. But so this was my life. I did have one primary possession in my life, and I bought it here with money that I made on my own when I was 14 or 15 years old. This is a garage sale. I don't know what you would call that here. Just craziness, probably. But I bought a set of Encyclopedia Britannicas for myself with my own money. They were 10 years old, totally out of date. But in these encyclopedias, I studied biographies. I studied all the science as old as it was. I studied everything I could possibly study. I had no other access to anything else. And so I just kind of curled up with my books and tried to figure out what made the world tick. Today, 77% of teachers assign homework that has to be done on the internet. Research has got to be done on the internet. And yet, a third of all people in the established countries, in the developed countries as they're called, a third of all families don't have access to the internet. So what happens when you don't have Encyclopedia Britannicas? What happens when you have no access to do what 77% of the teachers are asking you to do? It does create problems. Okay, that one is a video. Play that, please. This is about 600 meters from my home. Set. There we go. See that building way in the background? That's home. So this is 600 meters from my house are these environments. Now let's say we made some really cool housing that would really do a great job to make that look prettier. Would we really be solving the problems? You could hear the problems with your ears, couldn't you? There's crime issues, there are chaos issues, there are family issues. And so while housing is a component someplace on that middle level, at some point we're going to have to find a way to create an environment where the best ideas that we have actually work. This is also a video.
Idle hands. They say that the devil's workshop. Easy targets. Quick to kill time. But give idle hands something to do, a place to go, a purpose, and they're capable of amazing things.
Okay. While we look at regulations, while we look at new housing models, while we look at new finance models, let's not forget that the Tower of Babel didn't fall because it wasn't the appropriate form of multifamily vertical dense housing. The Tower of Babel was a failure because they didn't have relationships, they didn't communicate, they didn't collaborate. This whole invention, this thing that we're doing today, is a desire to get all of our hearts and our minds in the same place and to be able to relate to each other to solve the problems, not just with ideas, but holding each other's hands in order to get at the root of that kind of problem. There isn't any kind of housing that's going to solve that, is there? Right? We need to solve that at a different level. This is the telescope version. Do you all know what PTSD is? You raise your hand if you know what PTSD is. Post-traumatic stress disorder. Does that ring a bell now? Soldiers coming back from war that have had bombs blowing and they watch their friends die, they watch their friends' arm blown off. The people that they slept with and ate with are now gone and dead. PTSD is, you can actually find it with a brain scan. It's damaged neurons in the brain. And did you know that in urban areas where there's high crime and a lot of noise, that PTSD in urban areas is more prevalent in teenagers than in Baghdad after 2 Gulf Wars? They watched their buildings burn down. They watched soldiers run through their street. They watched airplanes come over and bomb. And the percentage of teenagers with PTSD is higher in my city and in Mexico City, no doubt, and other cities. PTSD percentage-wise per teen is higher in urban areas than it is in Baghdad. That's what we're up against. It's not just the housing. It's this whole view of how we have to function with one another. Worry, memory issues, aggression, depression, trust issues, paranoia. Education is very difficult to do when you have trust issues and depression and paranoia and memory issues. So when our children are suffering on that level, giving them a lecture and spanking them, grounding them, whatever, that's not going to solve the problem if they have PTSD. You can see it in a brain scan. We're going to have to approach it a little differently. Who would play this audio? These were all taken just across the river from where I live. That gives children an opportunity to grow into being contributors where they're taxpayers. Instead of taking government money, they're contributing government money. Instead of needing a mentor, they are a mentor. And so that's going to be one of our goals, I think, as we try to hold hands together to solve problems. MIT said that the best practices for aid programs, which include food distribution, it includes microloans, job training, housing, subsidized housing. The best practices in all the things that we do worldwide only reach 5% after 2 years. It feels good while we're doing it, but if you go back 2 years later, only 1 person out of 20 can show a measurable difference in their life. That's an MIT study. I'm not making that up. So it's really important that we find something better than the best practices. And the answer to that question is just really simply this. You can't hand somebody something and expect there to be a change. There has to be something developmental at the root, and that's a little harder to do. An orphanage is way easier to do than a family, isn't it? You who are parents know that if you just make rules and throw money at the problem, no matter how clever and creative you are, you're not going to help your teen survive into adulthood. I'm getting a lot of nods and agreement here. You understand if you've had children. Well, we all have children. These are our children. There are 1.2 billion people on this planet that are children under the age of 18 in poverty. 1.2 billion who are in poverty, suffering crime that could join twins are poverty and crime. You're going to get both if you have either, right? You can't separate those Siamese twins. Programs don't solve problems, handouts don't solve problems. Relationships and education solve problems. You familiar with the parable of the Good Samaritan that Jesus taught, I'm sure, right? I'm sure you're very familiar with that. It's a lesson in mercy. Religion doesn't solve the problem either, is what Jesus said. Mercy solves the problem. Love solves the problem. Dr. Martin Luther King made an interesting observation about that, though. I admire the Good Samaritan, but I don't want to be one. I don't want to spend my life picking people up off the side of the road after they've been beaten up and robbed. I want to change the Jericho Road so that everybody has an opportunity for a job, education, security, and health. That's the point, right? We can help people who have been beaten up, and that's a good thing to do. We can't stop doing that. But why don't we find a way to do what he also said to UN Ambassador Andrew Young? Mercy is good, right? But we need to address the problems at the root. We need to pave the Jericho Road and put up streetlights. Let's find some practical things that we can do to change the culture and change the atmosphere and address the problems at the root. A person's zip code or postal code should not determine a child's future. This is about a mile walk from my house. Everybody understands the problem, but they haven't really addressed the solution yet. To reduce the likelihood of poverty from 79% to 8%, do these three things. In other words, if you mishandle these three things, you have a 79% chance of poverty. If you handle these three things right, you only have an 8% chance of poverty. That's huge. 10 times better chance of being a contributor, having a solid family, having a job. Finish education at least through age 17. Don't have a baby until you're married, and don't have a baby until you're 20 years old. That's the big data information that we have. That you can actually change a generational solution by helping solve the problem at the root. We do want to give them housing. We want to do the food programs and the microloans, but let's get at the root of the issue. Education equals freedom. Freedom can occur only through education. Schiller was a poet, an inventor, and a philosopher in Germany. We don't know who Nelson Mandela is. Education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. So while we're holding hands and while we're thinking about vertical housing, let's not do it like the Tower of Babel. Let's do it relationally and hold each other's hands. A basic education at age 14 will reduce world poverty by 12%. Goldman Sachs and Harvard came up with that stat. 12%, that's 140 million children who would not be in poverty and crime right now if we had educated them to age 14. Education to age 17 doubles one income over a lifetime. And here's the kicker. There are $3 returned to society for every dollar spent on true education. $3 to every one, which means if we spend a whole bunch of money, for example, on gigabit Wi-Fi, free for the underserved communities, if we do that, we'll get $3 back for every one that we spend because there are fewer needs by those people. They're now contributing to the needs of society. They're paying taxes, they're mentors, they're creating jobs, they're working jobs, they're raising their families, they're protecting their children, they're buying houses, so they're less of a burden on society, we'll say. And they're contributing to society. They're not defective. They're not genetically less capable than any of us in contributing to society and having great ideas. They just don't have the opportunities that we do. True? Is that fair? There are a lot of people that have not had opportunities that are just as good as us. They're just as smart as us. They have just as much love in their hearts, but you can't really see that when they have PTSD and they're having all these issues at home and around in their lives. This will take a couple minutes, but I think you'll find it's worth watching.
You know the parable. It's witty. It's insightful. It's old. Give a man a fish, he's fed for the day. Teach him how to fish, he's fed for a lifetime. And of course it's all true. Oh, but wait, it's not really true. Not entirely. The free meal and the job training are very nice thoughts and quite helpful to a point, but frustrating and proven ultimately to be ineffective in all 215 of our world countries in every generation. Why? The parable sounds so good. And the food and the job training, what's wrong with that? Why doesn't it work? Why doesn't it work anywhere? Because we've never lived in a generation until now where we can rewrite the parable and add the third and conclusive part for all who are willing to pursue their potential. Give a man a fish, he's fed for the day. Teach him how to fish, he's fed for a lifetime. Unless he doesn't have a fishing pole or bait. Oops. But then, until the last 5 years or so on this planet, there was no good way to make sure every man, woman, and child have a fishing pole. Help him to have the tools to fish, and then, if he cares, he's fed for a lifetime. Prior to the last 5 years, education and jobs and relationships, research, money, inspiration, connections, these things could not be effectively acquired by those who do not already have these things. Little history. The Industrial Revolution and its new factories and capabilities 150 years ago brought amazing changes. But it was a CapEx structure, and by its nature it gave very uneven rewards. Wealth and power landed upon a mere 5%. To the next 50% came mediocrity with a ceiling, and the structure of the Industrial Revolution gave the remaining 45% a ridiculous boat anchor to carry of isolation, heavy labor, or unemployment, and the generational limitations of dumbed-down education, boredom, and social barriers. The game was rigged in favor of a minority few who were privileged or lucky, or the few who beat the system. It was just the nature of the Industrial Revolution. But now, if we will seize the opportunity decisively, we can take that boat anchor and toss it deep into the sea. Today truly is a new opportunity. This is the information revolution, the knowledge, the wisdom revolution. Today already 40% of all new ideas come from very unheralded, unrecognized corners of the earth, rather than the previous generations of 98% control by wealthy corporations and individuals with absurd entry barriers to the rest of us. We now live in a golden era that we've been waiting for thousands of years. Let's not waste it. Now, for the first time in human history, we have a chance to embrace the full potential of every man, every woman, every child, in every neighborhood, every social strata, every economic strata. And we'll need all the help we can get with the staggering challenges ahead for resources and population density and energy and environment. Today, education, relationships, connections, research, inspiration, these things can be available to every single aspiring human if, for a minimal investment into our communities, those who govern us, along with those who control our internet and power, along with philanthropic hearts, these can combine their efforts to build our communities by providing free gigabit Wi-Fi to all of the local residents with family incomes below 50% of the median income. We can provide the programs and the training and the entitlements, feed and train our most vulnerable, and also give them the fishing pole of gigabit Wi-Fi provided for free without subscription cost to provide for themselves and their families and their neighbors. Everyone wins. The government will be paid back with less crime, fewer necessary entitlements, more income, better morale, and more re-electable candidates. The backbone providers will ultimately gain subscribers in geographic and demographic areas that would have remained impossible, and the intellectual wealth of every depressed neighborhood will be set free, as long as there is no more wait at the library or or shame in the classroom for unfinished or poorly done homework because of lack of internet opportunity. The best teachers on the planet will be in every home that wants them via Khan Academy, Harvard, MIT, Coursera, great courses, and many others. Jobs will be created, companies birthed, returning citizens, veterans, and the homeless will be able to sell goods and services. Virtual house calls and healthcare will be possible in homes. Parking revenue will be doubled, traffic congestion cut decisively, water and air quality monitored, power and water preserved via smart grids, crime will be diminished, and so much more. Can we? Will we? Who will stand up, and who would even want to stand in the way? As of this date in 2016, never has a people's government and their commercial and economic structures provided the tools for lives to change and generations of vulnerable and underserved communities to be transformed. The tools didn't even exist. We're not talking about free video games or free movies for all, but free education and free job search and job creation and infinite access to communication to the vulnerable and the underserved, but only to those below the 50% mark of median income. I was discussing all of this with the director of the Harvard Graduate School and International Programs. We dialogued about free gigabit Wi-Fi for returning citizens and the vulnerable in urban areas and worldwide. We discussed gigabit Wi-Fi 100 times as fast as typical household connections, perhaps on a platform of LED streetlights, adding smart city sensors for water and air monitoring, power savings, traffic control, crime reduction, medical and emergency services, partnerships with Harvard, Khan Academy, Coursera, MIT, and others. She described this as, quote, a new space, the intersection between real estate and economic development, technology, community development, and social justice. A new space. A major survey was done within a societal cross-section of 25-year-olds, following them all the way to age 65. Of those 25-year-olds, by age 65, only 1 out of 100 is wealthy. Only 4 out of 100 are secure in any way financially. Out of 125-year-olds by age 65, more than 55 out of the 100 are totally broke. Feed them a fish at age 25, they're fed for a day. Give them a job or a program, they're fed for another day or two. Give them fish and teach them to fish, and the fishing pole of world-class educational opportunities at Harvard or MIT or Khan Academy. Give them relationships, give them connections, give them job opportunities, and then, as has been true for centuries, education equals freedom. It's time to weaponize the facts. We aren't talking about adding an amenity of Wi-Fi to an apartment building. We're talking about transforming many, many square miles of underserved communities in urban areas and in world communities with gigabit Wi-Fi, changing the homes and the schools of urban cities and even remote world villages using lossless laser radio technology to propagate even 10 gigabit Wi-Fi up to 10 kilometers without fiber optic cable. There's no longer the necessity in our era of digging up roads and laying fiber optic cable. The obstacles are gone. Without vision, the people perish. Can we use this first time in human history opportunity together now to combine the efficiencies, the cost savings, and the revenue generation of the smart city with the Internet of Everything technology to also catapult our next generation and the underserved, and therefore catapult our world into new successes beyond our imaginations? Let's do this together. It'll be a little bit of sacrifice on everyone's part, but let's have vision for 25% of the human population and give them a chance by giving them a fishing pole. Let's do this.
Okay, I'm sure that introduces all sorts of technical questions, which we can deal with at some point too. But I think it's fair to say that there are opportunities in front of us that were not available 5 years ago. 5 years ago, 6 years ago, what we just described was not possible. We can now educate 15,000 young people for the same price as educating 15. That wasn't possible 5 or 6 years ago. The top 10% of all teachers, according to Economist magazine, impart 3 times as much knowledge to the students as the lowest 10%. There aren't that many good teachers in the world, and they're not going to the worst possible places because they don't have to. And so if we want to get all of our neighborhoods, all of our children, the whole human family an opportunity, this is how we're going to do it. There won't be another way. The opportunity's here if we've got the guts to do it. Now that's our Capitol building, obviously. I can run to that. I run past that building all the time. It's a 10-minute run from my house. But you noticed all that aerial footage. If you pan in a little closer, you would see a lot of poverty, a lot of bad situations. I suspect if we went to the Mexican capital and did about a mile and a half view from the aerial viewpoint, you'd probably see a lot of poverty, a lot of crime areas and so on. I suspect that's true. What I'd like to submit to you is that this actually has already been proven to work. And here's how I know. In the year 2000, 5% of global 500 corporations were in emerging companies. 1 out of every 20 of global 500 corporations were in emerging countries. Now 25% of the global 500 corporations are in emerging countries. Corporations have used technology and communication to draw out talents and level the playing field. Corporations in the most destitute and most backwards countries on the planet, they don't have near the resources that any of the North American countries have. They've worked their way into the global 500 by using the same technology that we can help our children with. We can change the future of the next generation and take that crime and those idle hands out of the equation for a high percentage of these children if we'll make the right decisions to do that, to hold hands together, not just put a fix on them, not just give a man a fish and feed him for a day, but find a way to get to the root of it and educate our children. Education equals freedom. Take a couple questions and then we'll go right into the next section, which is the microscope view of the exact same problem. Oh, a little transition.
I think that it's very, very interesting the way that you put the things. Very interesting. And I think you're right. But what happens when there are no fish anymore? For what I see is many of the things of the world, they are not taking care of the sustainability. And that's also true for the human cell. Normally the education now don't guarantee that you will be a successful people. Maybe you will be not in the line of poverty, but definitely the normal education in the world doesn't guarantee that you will be successful. So we have to change also the education model.
Exactly.
And normally they are focused in one side of the brain. And we need to focus in both sides of the brain.
It's perfect. You're exactly right.
So I hope that we can try together not use the Wi-Fi, but use wisely.
Right. Okay, so let me elaborate just for a moment on that. We're talking about a new model of education, a collaboration model of education. Now, because we have gigabit Wi-Fi, we've got the Encyclopedia Britannica up to date to the very second, available on smart devices, which are easy enough to make sure everybody has. 60% of Africa's got a smartphone at this point. It's not that hard to get anymore. But a collaborative environment such as a Starbucks sort of environment, an environment much like this. You put a computer on the table, you get all the students just to talk about something. What did you notice on your way today to class? It's not the teaching model. It's not the model of the little yellow factory buses going and the teacher standing in front teaching a lesson and all the students memorizing what was said, and then they get a good grade because they memorized what was said. That's not learning. That's exactly what you were saying. That's the wrong model. An education model where people learn are people teaching themselves, grabbing that Encyclopedia Britannica, and then going all the way to multi-level degrees at the highest and most lofty places out of safety pins in their clothes. Right? It can happen, and it will happen if we have the model of learning rather than the model of regurgitation. The factory schools don't work. Repeating information is not learning. Asking a table full of children to say, what did you notice on the way to work? Well, I noticed some buildings were made out of brick and whatever that white stuff, mortar in between. Others were made out of stone. Some were vinyl, I think, which was kind of like plastic, and some were wood. All right, so what's that plastic? What is that? Look it up, find out. And your whole table is now researching that. How are bricks made? Where does that come from? And so now the whole table is looking that up, and they're going home, and they're actually studying it some more because now they're curious. Children are born curious. We ruin their curiosity by this factory method of education. We destroy our children and then wonder why they have idle hands. I'm so glad you brought that up. It's perfect. We need to create a creative mind, a design mindset that learns how to learn and how to research. Guess what? You're going to have a 14-year-old entrepreneur who creates a new building material because he thinks it's totally caveman the way bricks are made. And a 14-year-old, you saw already in that video, 40% of all new ideas come from, not from the institutions like an IBM and a Dow and DuPont. They don't come from there anymore. It used to be 98% of all good ideas were created there because they were the only ones that had the resources to follow through with it. But now 40% of all good ideas, all startups, come from very obscure places all over the world. 25% of the Global 500 are in emerging markets, and it's because of just that. They learned how to learn. They didn't have the factory program to dumb them down. The Industrial Revolution needed factory workers to stand on the assembly line and do this all day. They weren't going to teach them how to learn. Why would they? That would make them too curious. Education equals freedom. We don't want them to be free. We want them to stand up and crank things out. Well, that's fine, I suppose. The Industrial Revolution had its place. But we don't live there anymore. This is the information age. This is the data-driven age. And now, a 14-year-old, I mean, look at the billionaires like the Zuckerbergs, guys like that. Mark Cuban started a business from his dorm room. I mean, it's entirely possible now to create an empire out of a mud hut. With a smartphone and a Wi-Fi connection, you can have an idea that would never have been heard 10 years ago. So it's this creative mindset with facilitators, with mentors that are helping Proctor, not just teaching them to sit back and take a test on it, but teaching them how to inquire and giving them the tools to learn how to burrow into a topic and then create out of that topic. Every table should be an incubator. Every childhood home should be an incubator for ideas and to draw on their ideas because we have some problems. We have some serious problems. We're going to have another 3 billion people here pretty soon. There'll be 10,000 new global cities by the year 2040. How are we going to support that? Where's the infrastructure for that? Where are the ideas? Where's the food? Where's the petroleum? Where's the, all the resources, the clean water? Where's that going to come from without ideas? We're all done for by 2040. So it's essential that we teach them how to learn and give them the tools to do exactly that. Education equals freedom. Not the factory version, the collaborative model. That is exactly what we're doing here today. That's exactly what we're doing. We're sharing ideas across national lines, and we can do that internationally, day after day after day. There was a famous mayor of Washington, D.C. that I had a conversation with. He's deceased now, but I gave him a jar of jelly beans. He ate half of them before we were done having this conversation. But it was all mixed up jelly beans and then a jar of 3 stratas of green, blue, and red in another jar. I said, if we don't live like this, if we don't learn how to draw on the resources of everybody around us, if we don't live like this jar of jelly beans with 10,000 colors in a multicultural way, where we receive one another, we build on one another, we have a synergy of thought and excitement and drive and opportunity, if we won't bring those ideas across international boundaries and use the tools like gigabit Wi-Fi to do that, then we're going to die in our tracks. We don't have the resources to carry this show on. It's not going to happen. So I'm so glad you brought that up. I didn't want to take the time to say all of that, but you made me, so it's okay. Okay, let's go on to the next thought.